Good morning, Heroes community. It's great to have many of you live with us today. We are recording today's session because we had many folks who were unable to join today and still want to hear about this topic and content. A couple of other housekeeping reminders before we get started. Again, for those of you who just tapped in, this is being recorded so we can share with our community members of Heroes in building active bystandership in multiple settings, but today we're going to focus on in corrections. It's being recorded for that purpose to share out. We would love to hear from you. I am going to be introducing our two guest speakers to here in a moment, but I assure you I just prepped with them and they would like to hear from you as well. At the bottom of your screen in Zoom, you have two ways you can connect with us. You can either hit chat and message to hosts and panelists, and that will come right to us and we can look at questions, or you can use the Q&A button. Either one of those will send questions to us, and we would love to make sure that we highlight your interest or your comments. The other thing that I want to highlight as a reference point is also on the scroll bar, there is a button that says resources. And if you click on that, you'll see two resources. One, if you want to get more information about Heroes Active Bystandership. And the second one is a book that has just been published, which we'll talk about a little bit here in a moment from one of our panelists today. So wanted to share that resource. We are going to be launching a couple polls and quizzes throughout today. So just know that we'll be looking for your engagement and participation on that. Okay, so again, welcome. I'm so excited. I've had the pleasure of getting to know both of these individuals in different ways over the course of, well, Millie and I go back several years now, I think almost 4 or 5 years. And Jeremiah and I have had getting to know each other over the last 2 years, I think. So it's my true pleasure to introduce both of them to you. I'm going to start by introducing Reverend Dr. Millie Johnson, who is a correctional chaplain, an educator, and an advocate. Reverend Dr. Johnson brings decades of experience ministering within correctional settings. Her work centers on trauma-informed care, restorative justice, and the role of faith in healing institutions and individuals. She is a passionate advocate for human dignity and moral courage within the system, and she is now a published book author, and you can get the link to her book that is 100% on point to this content today in the resources tab, or for some reason, any reason that doesn't work for you, just contact me and I'll be more than happy to share. We're excited to have you, Millie. And then, yeah, and then I also have Dr. Jeremiah Johnson, who is the Assistant Commissioner at the New York City Department of Corrections. Dr. Johnson combines executive leadership experience in one of the nation's largest correctional systems with a deep commitment to workforce wellness and public service. A respected speaker and faith leader, he brings a unique perspective on integrating faith-informed leadership with operational realities. And to really set the tone and get us started, I want to share something with you all that we were just talking about backstage. Millie just thanked Heroes for creating the space to have this conversation. And I shared it with her that we've been doing lunch and learns to build community around active bystandership in public safety and criminal justice for this entire year. And this was the first lunch and learn where I had multiple agency instructors and individuals reach out after they registered to say thank you for bringing this topic forward. So clearly this is a space and a conversation that people want to immerse themselves in. And that is my final reminder to say that our panelists have much to share, but if you have questions or thoughts, they would love to hear from you. Feel free to use the chat feature or the Q&A. I'm going to start with my first question, Jeremiah, and that is, what has faith meant to you personally in the context of correctional work?
Sure. And I'd like to broaden that just a little bit to a wider law enforcement lens for a moment, because I originally was a policing practitioner, and I consider myself swimming downstream, having spent time in sentencing and now corrections for the last 2.5 years. And I haven't had the privilege of serving as a sworn correction officer before. And I say privilege just because my respect for corrections professionals has really just burgeoned over the last 2.5 years. I do think, coming from the outside, as I came from municipal policing, there's even a little bit of a bias against correction officers from the broader law enforcement community, and just realizing the sacrifices and important work that they do every day, making a difference in the lives of incarcerated individuals that law enforcement sort of helps put behind bars, but correction officers are just such a key piece of the system, and they're unheralded heroes. So that's why I phrased it that way. But to broaden the scope a little bit, and I'm hoping I'm not adding connection issues because it appears people are frozen.
We hear you great.
Can you hear me?
Yes. There was, I think we heard you great. I think you had a little lag on yours, but you sound and you look great.
Okay, my apologies. So, going back actually to my college career, and you didn't mention this in the intro, but both Dr. Johnson and I have a connection to a Christian institution in Western Pennsylvania called Geneva College. And I had done my undergraduate there. I was a sociology major. They didn't have criminal justice there at the time, which is what brought Dr. Johnson's there to that institution. But I had a professor in a philosophy course that I was taking by the name of Dr. Byron Bitar, who's since passed into glory, but a really great man. Had a privilege of learning from him. He knew about my aspirations to become a police officer. And he asked me, what does it mean to be a Christian police officer? And he sort of joked. It may have been a rhetorical question, but he joked, does it mean that you inscribe Bible verses on your nightstick, right? It's great sort of Socratic dialogue guy. And I really didn't have a good answer for him. And it wasn't until many years into my policing career, or I should say several years, where it really clicked for me. And it came from a Bible passage in the book of Micah, chapter 6, verse 8, where it talks about what God requires of you. And there's just, I'm summarizing it, and it's become a bit of a credo for my life, which is do justice, love mercy, and walk humbly. And that's really what I tried to embody in my law enforcement career and going forward. I think I entered the field with a bit of naivete about good guys, bad guys. I honestly thought that I really wouldn't have that many moral conflicts, right? I was on the side of the blue, right? And when I got into the work, I realized that there were in fact some bad actors in law enforcement, and in the context of calling some of that out and reporting that, I was on the receiving end of some retaliation, and faith really carried me through that. So that's my own sort of lived experience. But I think in a broader corrections context, from a faith-based lens, I think it's really important to recognize and realize the opportunity for restoration. I think that's a theme that's very important that I didn't often see on the policing side, right? We were putting people behind bars, right? Book them, send them off. You'd never really see them again. And I think even just the name of corrections implies that there is an opportunity to change lives. And in corrections, you really do see a lot of that change, particularly maybe in state correction systems, not as much jails, but that transformation as incarcerated individuals experience the crisis of incarceration, and how there can be heart change and life changes as well. So I think faith really intersects with that well.
Thank you so much. And I want to, initially I was thinking, in my years of being the mental health person in county jails, I often would experience that crisis moment. And I remember sharing with staff, this can be seen as the worst day of their lives, but it could become the start of something new. And I hear that really resonating in your faith values. So thank you so much. And thank you for reminding and sharing with the audience that you and Dr. Johnson also both went to Geneva College. I love that overlap. I'm going to quickly share. I did a quick poll of who's in the room. So folks, I'm just going to share those results with you all. But essentially we've got most of our folks are coming to us with 16 to 25 years in corrections. That's a lot of experience. Thank you. And it looks like as far as leaders, we've got a mix of middle management and lieutenants, captains, commanders. So really excited to have kind of those of you here in the room. And with that, Millie, I want to hand it back over to you. You know, the question that we started with was, what has faith meant to you personally in the context of working with correctional workforce and in institutions?
So thank you for that question. I think I'll piggyback a little bit off of what Dr. Johnson said, because we both do come from a faith-based institution, but we both actually come from law enforcement. And when I left the field of law enforcement and started to go into the Ministry of Corrections, and I did that for almost 3 years as a chaplain, but I was very, and hopefully I'll have time to tell more about my story as we get into the webinar, but I was very broken when I walked into the field of corrections. I was asked to do it alongside of another chaplain, and I was very hesitant because I believe Dr. Jeremiah said it correctly, that there is that kind of feeling from law enforcement as far as on the outside as a police officer and going into law enforcement in the correctional side. And so I really was very hesitant because I was very angry, very broken because of the trauma and the tragedies that I had suffered on the outside as far as a police officer. So going into the field of corrections, I know it was nothing but God and faith that took me there. And there's a story behind it. And that restoration and that healing did happen for me and an individual that I encountered while there. But the faith, I had to go in, I had to do it. There was no way I could say no. It was as if I was being pushed to go, but it was definitely a faith walk for me because of what I had suffered coming out of police work after about 15 years of doing that and going into the field of correction. So I had to take my faith with me because there were other people that needed what I had to give. And my position there was working through the chaplain's office, and we worked alongside of inmates that were about to be released, and we were preparing them for reintegration back into society, back into community, back into life, back into family. And so it was a great ministry, but it was hard because I had so many broken feelings and emotions that I took alongside of me. So that faith walk, I had to walk in there with faith and the belief that there's somebody here that needs me. I don't know who it is. I don't know who's going to change my life. I don't know whose life I'm going to change. But probably a little further down in the webinar, I'll be able to share that story.
Thank you so much. And I appreciate you sharing that, you know, very vulnerable, like, here's how I entered working with this system for sure. I think that makes this very real. One of the things, actually, Millie, I'd like to build right off of there. I think it's important that we understand that, you know, our tone here isn't to provide a preaching platform, but more understand to illuminate the role of resilience and meaning and wellness. And of course, you know, something that we're passionate about at Heroes is how to elevate our correctional workforce. We know that they have a direct impact on the healing journey of those that they are entrusted with and their care. And so I'm kind of building off there. Millie, can you share a moment where faith-based connection helped transform something difficult in the corrections workspace, either with an individual or a staff person? Oh, looks like you've got a great idea in mind. I'll hand it over to you.
Okay, thank you. So I can kind of go into it a little bit more. So as a police officer, I was set on fire while in the line of duty. And so it was a very traumatic incident. It was horrifying. And when it went to court, and I'll try to keep it as short as I possibly can, when we went to court, the gentleman that did it was definitely relieved of all charges. So nothing happened. I mean, it was traumatic. I was off of work. I suffered, you know, the burn and everything healed. But as a result of that, and it all stemmed from something political as far as the judge and the attorney. And so it was already worked out long before I got there. And when the sentence of not guilty was handed down, I yelled out in court, "I can't believe this is happening. I was just doing my job. I was just doing what I'm supposed to do." And they tried to hold me in contempt of court and arrest me. And so um, that is where I believe the entire journey for me started. I continued to work in police work for years after that, but I was very angry with the system, very hurt. I became very negative, very cynical, and just very broken. And I had mentioned the brokenness that I took into the field of corrections and why I did not want to do it because I knew that I wasn't ready for that. I wasn't healed. I hadn't been restored. I hadn't been transformed or reconciled in any way. And now you want me to go in here and deal with people who have caused other people, hurt and harm, and you want me to go in and be this representative for Christ. But I did it. And so it probably was a few months after I had been there in the ministry and working alongside of inmates, I noticed this individual that I knew from my past. It was the young man that set me on fire. And he had been arrested for drugs. He was dealing major drugs out there in the street, and he had been arrested, and he remembered me. And so this kind of gives me the reason why I ended up being there, because I needed to be healed and restored. And so when I first saw him, of course, all the emotions of anger and all the things that I felt for him back before this encounter happened again, all of those emotions rushed up again. And he came to me, he said to me, he goes, "I remember you." And I said, "I remember you too." But I'm going to be honest with you all, I wasn't the very kind person at that time. I said, "You remember what you did to me." And I said, "And you're here where you're supposed to be, but you're not here as a result of what you did to me." I said, "But nothing goes unnoticed." And I said, "I'm glad you are here. You belong here." And I said, "I wanted you to die, and I had wished that for you." Um, and it still bothers me a little bit because of the way I felt at that time. But he said, I just need to talk with you." I said, I can't talk with you right now. This is just not the time. I'm not ready for that." And so after that encounter, I continued to see him. He continued to say things like, "I need to talk with you. Can you at least just hear me out?" And I was unforgiving, and I did not want to talk to him. I did not want to hear him. So I began to pray about it because I needed to be healed. I wanted to let go of that anger and those feelings that I had. And so I'm going to cut it short. I eventually did take the opportunity to have a conversation with him. And he explained to me exactly why he did it. He said it wasn't anything against you as a police officer. He said I was very, very intoxicated. There was over 3,000 people in the street when it happened. I had a big time tiki torch, and I just flipped it at you. He said it probably would have been anybody who came to me with authority at that time, but it just happened to be you. And he said, "I just want you to know I am so, so sorry." And I believe at that point, I forgave him, and we actually embraced each other. I actually had an opportunity. I was that close to him to actually embrace him and hug him. And I said, "I forgive you." I said, "Not only do I forgive you, but I want to thank you. I want to thank you for this opportunity for me to let go and be healed." And that was the beginning of restoration for me. And so when I go back to asking, I mean, I know I was there for a purpose and I changed a lot of lives, but that point changed my life, and restoration and reconciliation took place for me. And I was healed, and I was able to walk out of there that day a brand new person because I let go of all of those feelings and I was able to forgive him. And he had lots of remorse and he said he was sorry. So it made a big difference. So my faith grew even stronger after that occurred.
Thank you so much for sharing that very real, human, vulnerable experience and highlighting the role of forgiveness. Something that we talk a lot about in active bystandership training is that we are not perfect. There's no expectation to be perfect. If you get it right 25% of the time, that's 25% better than it was beforehand. And I think you're really overlapping on this. The role of how faith-based perspective, including forgiveness, just enhances that, because we're about the health and wellness of our focus is on the workforce because we know the impact that it has with those that they're entrusted with. And it seems like there was healing for both. I mean, what a great example, right? Healing for you, healing for that incarcerated individual. I mean, that's the power of what we're trying to do here. So thank you so much for sharing that. And folks, I did put a link to her book in the chat, and it's in resources as well if you want to continue to hear more about these examples. I was thinking, Millie, as you were talking, that's such a great, the power of individual examples, I think, can make this human work for us. I think something that often is not talked about is the power also at the next level. And so Dr. Johnson, Jeremiah, I'm realizing we have two Dr. Johnsons on, which is how that escaped me until this moment is beyond me. I should have, there's a really catchy title there somewhere that I'm just not creative enough to think about. But so thus I'll refer to both of you as their first names. Plus we know what hierarchy can do. It's a social inhibitor to bystandership. So Jeremiah, I'm curious for you if you have any examples of seeing faith positively impact leaders, or how that then impacts at the agency level.
Absolutely. So I think people have a certain perception of what New York City government is like and what New York City agencies must be like in correlation to faith, and the impression might be that it's a hostile environment. And my own experience has actually been quite the opposite. I've actually found the New York City Department of Correction to be a very faith-filled place, and a lot of that, I believe, has to do with the leadership of our current commissioner, Linnell McGinley Liddy, who's been the commissioner for the last 2 years. She's the daughter of a pastor, and she's a faith-filled woman who I know prays for staff. And in fact, there's she's created a weekly prayer call. It's something that's completely optional, but every Monday morning, there are community faith leaders that come in on the call and read scripture and lead staff in prayer. There's an opportunity for staff members to pray openly, and they're really powerful sessions because you see leaders who are praying not just for staff but also for our persons in custody. So I think that has been to have a commissioner who cares about staff in that way is incredibly powerful and not something that you would expect in New York City.
I really do appreciate that. And I think I've been to New York City one time since I last came and visited you in the department. And the second time I was there recently, I was with my teenage daughter, and it was her first time in New York City. And she had all of these impressions about how people were going to treat her. You know, we're in Colorado. It's a little different out here. And within our first few minutes where we were trying to get on public transportation to our location, I tripped and fell pretty much flat on my face in the subway. And 3 total strangers all stopped, asked me if I was okay, offered to help. And instantly, I think my daughter was like, oh, okay, so there's kind humans everywhere. This is just, maybe it's just a stigma about New York City.
And I think they've even debunked a little bit of the there's a Kitty Genovese case where some of the bystandership stuff came from, right?
Yes. Yes, it's one of our social science experiments. Darley and Latané did their research at NYU in follow-up to the Kitty Genovese incident, in which at the time, the headlines were that all these people saw this horrible event and did not intervene. But the debunking later was that many different individuals attempted to intervene. And it actually was unique because the research science that Darley and Latané did at NYU actually did share with us these concepts of diffusion of responsibility and pluralistic ignorance, where I, Abigail, might witness harm and individually intervene if I think it's just me. But if I'm standing next to Millie and next to Jeremiah, that presence of others might disinhibit my otherwise moral intention to intervene and prevent harm. And so interestingly, they certainly elevated that. But then the debunking of the Kitty Genevieve incident, if you look on the American Psychological Association and you also put in Kitty Genevieve, they did a nice review of that decades later that really also highlighted other inhibitors to intervening, such as race, socioeconomic status, and gender. And also at that time, that was pre-911, the national system.
Yes.
And that was one of the major inhibitors, is that there was confusion on how to notify emergency responders that help was needed. And so it's a cool trip down history, as well as debunking that myth that people don't want to help, even in large cities like New York City. And yes, I do see something in the chat. This session is being recorded, and we will be posting it up to our site probably by the end of the day, Jackson, but if not, it'll be up by the end of the weekend for sure. And we'll make sure we get a notice out to all attendees about where you can find that recording. Thank you for asking. I don't know that I mentioned that at the start. We know there's a lot of people who signed up who are unable to attend. That's why we're recording. And so, Jeremiah, I want to just reflect when you said this is this powerful opportunity where, you know, the top leader is opening a voluntary optional prayer call for anybody in the department. I mean, I got goosebumps, and I actually know there's a couple of folks on this call that I see are from CDCR, California Department of Corrections, and one of which I know is very faith-based. And I just wonder if this is one of those little ideas that you're sharing that gets shared with other correctional agencies across the country. Said, oh, I wonder if we could do that, right, to help elevate our workforce in a way that supports them. So thank you for just sharing that. And it actually leads me to my next question. And Millie, I'm going to start with you, but Jeremiah, if you have any thoughts, I would love you to chime in as well. Because actually somebody asked me in advance of this, what were my faith values? And I shared with them that although I was raised in Christian values, I consider myself maybe to be more spiritual than religious at this time in my life. I'm still very drawn to it. And I know that there's many individuals working in corrections who maybe have a different faith perspective than a Christian perspective. And I think it's so important to understand that the topic is about faith, not necessarily, aligning to one. And so I was curious, Millie, my question is, how do we balance in workforces? Let's just take correctional workforce. How do we balance professionalism and personal beliefs in systems that are secular or are very diverse, and people who have different perspectives and different walks of life? You know, how do we balance when people might question or concern how our personal values impact our professional work?
So for me, Abby, as a chaplain and one who has gone into corrections and worked alongside of police officers on the outside, we did have the opportunity to have chaplains that were from various different faiths. But for me, I never pushed my faith on anyone. For me, it was about walking the walk and not necessarily telling everybody, this is who I am, this is what I believe. I wanted people to see the integrity, the honesty. I wanted people to see the respect. I wanted people to feel my heart. And people don't really care about how much you know, they want to know how much you care. And so that was just big for me, just treating people the way that I wanted to be treated. And that didn't necessarily have to be a standpoint from my faith, but I never hid who I was neither. But I never made it such an expression so that people would think, oh, here she is, walking around and she's here and she's there. No, I just wanted to treat people the way that I wanted to be treated, and just show people dignity and respect. And I thought if I did that in kindness, and leave people better than the way that I found them. And I believe, sometimes we might be that Bible that people read. They might not have the Bible or whatever they believe, but if they see it in you as an individual and you walk it out, to me, that's the best expression I can have of my faith. Be honest, be truthful, be respectful, have integrity, show love, show kindness, and let people know that you are there for them. And you practice that and be professional, because you don't have to always tell somebody something. You might not be, right now I work in a faith institution, so I can do that openly. But in the correctional side and in police, we have chaplains, but we're not called to walk around and show our faith. We're called to just be there and walk alongside of people when they need you.
I love that. First, on this topic, I just launched another poll about the presence of faith in your workforce. So if you have a moment, we'd love to get your thoughts. And then after Jeremiah speaks, I can share those results. But one of the things you said that really resonated with is we have to practice. I've been doing some talks lately in the psychology world about the role of active bystandership in ethical practice. And one of the things I share all the time is that I'm not getting it right every single day, but I am practicing towards a set of values that I think lead us towards ethical decision making. And so, again, I love that we're all human. It's not meant to be perfect, but when we practice it, we get better at it. Thank you. Jeremiah, do you have any thoughts on that question as well?
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, New York City is a very diverse place, and we recruit from, citywide. There's so many different groups that are represented. And I do think that there is a commonality of faith values that you do come across that are found across lots of different religious backgrounds. But it's really interesting. So I'm one of the executives that runs the Correction Academy for the New York City Department of Correction. And we have a lot of recruits that come through and have diverse backgrounds, and a lot of staff as well. But I think just in having a lot of one-on-one conversations, there's sort of a, maybe it's the Holy Spirit, there's a resonance there, where you do come across other believers. And just as you talk about life and hardships and loss, that's one of probably the most salient things in my time at New York City is just, of course, we know a lot about the health outcomes in corrections, but just peers and relatives who served, whose lives have come to an end far too early, perhaps in part because of the sacrifices that they've made in the corrections field. There are just so many opportunities for those faith conversations, and I would even say with and I've come across people who work for me outside of the Department of Correction. I found one of them is a pastor. He doesn't wear it on his sleeve, but on his past day, he's preaching in the pulpit, right? But even with recruits, and I'll just give a quick anecdote. It's not as powerful as what Dr. Johnson shared, but in a conversation with a recruit a couple days before she was to enter the jail, we were having a conversation, and faith came up, and she talked about her faith and strengthening her. And she's a single mom, going into work this really punishing schedule, and of course Rikers Island, where the New York City Department of Correction holds our incarcerated individuals, has a notorious reputation, and she was dealing with a lot of fear. And one of the things that I carry behind my own badge, even though I'm not a corrections officer, is something I got from the American Jail Association of all places, right? Is the correction officer's prayer, and I was able to share that with her and give her those words as something that she could recite and take into memory as she goes behind the gate for the first time. So I do think that there are those opportunities which are appropriate when people share their own expressions of faith, where you can share your own and reinforce and encourage them in their own walk and going through hardships.
I appreciate that very much. Is that from the ACA or the AJA?
AJA. Yes.
AJA. Okay. American Jail Association. And for those of you who are not already members or familiar, I'm putting that link into the chat as well. And there's a lot of similar work being done in both the American Correctional Association and the American Jail Association, but certainly there's examples of where we really come together, and I think that faith is one of them.
And I think just there's that expression, there are no atheists in foxholes, right? I think especially with new officers going into the jail for the first time to work that post or work in that housing unit, I don't know if there are many pure atheists at that moment.
Appreciate that. I'm thinking about too, I just had a conversation with a correctional leader the other day, and they were talking about they too have been both a law enforcement officer and a correctional deputy in a jail and have worked their way up to leadership. And what she was sharing is, I realized within weeks of my new job working in a jail setting that I was going to have to really settle in on my values in a totally different way than when I was on the streets. And she goes, there's a different feel. And I mean, I can personally relate to working in a jail. When you walk in and those doors slam behind you and you realize the only thing between you and out is somebody's paying attention and unlocks the door for you, it's a unique experience for sure. I just want to quickly share the results from the poll that we just did. This is the faith presence. So thank you for participating. The first one was, in your experience, how present is faith or spirituality in your correctional workplace culture? Boy, 50% said rarely acknowledged. And I think that really highlights why there was such interest in this topic today, because people want to talk about it and what do you believe faith-informed practices can help improve, and really across the gamut: morale, connection, resilience, burnout, communication, and trust among staff for sure. So really appreciate folks sharing your thoughts on that poll. Yeah, it's pretty powerful. I see, Millie, your response. I mean, it's quite the dichotomy when we say it's not talked about or integrated, and then look at all the places that it could help with. So we are, heroes. We're excited to just create the opportunity for this conversation. But if folks think that there should be more or a follow-up, please let us know. We're always looking to hear from our corrections community about what topics they want to talk about. So I want to kind of pivot a little bit to Millie. I'm going to put you on the spot here because Millie is also a HEROES national instructor. So Millie has implemented our active bystandership curriculum with us in correctional agencies. And one of the things that I know is that when Millie is out doing the good work of HEROES active bystandership, we do surveys on our instructors, and like clockwork, every group that gets Millie comes back and it's a shared theme of they just feel loved. I mean, they feel like they were heard, they were valued, they were loved. I hear comments like, we had these great deep conversations. And one of the things that's really important to us when we're training on our curriculum is that people don't just walk away with knowledge and skills about how to intervene, but that they feel heard and valued. We know that the work in corrections is challenging work, as Jeremiah was just highlighting in his example. And that's an opportunity for people to feel valued in a different kind of way. I'm curious, Millie, if you see any overlaps in your faith perspective and maybe some of the work that you talked about in your book and the active bystandership work that you've shared with us over the last couple of years.
So absolutely. You had mentioned some of the feedback you get. One of the big things I try to pride myself on is, again, making people feel heard, making sure that they know that they matter and they are valued. And I also like to encourage. That's probably one of the strongest things for me, is just encouraging people and letting people know, you know what, you do matter. And sometimes, especially in the criminal justice system, and as you're talking about like active bystandership, just letting them know that, I'm here for you. Because a lot of times when we're talking about bystandership and we teach it, that you might not necessarily be the actual individual that has to do the intervention, but you can also intervene by utilizing other avenues and utilizing other people. So it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to step in all the time, but you recognize that something is wrong, and you recognize, because there's always signs and you're paying attention to those signs. So being able, even if you're not the person that directly intervenes, but definitely letting people know that you see them, that they're heard, that you understand, that you recognize. And if you see something, you say something, you step up, you let somebody know, even if it's not necessarily you. You might not be that person, you might not be that designated individual, but you see it and you say something. You don't ignore it, and you don't ignore people. You let people know that they matter. And so, teaching as a national instructor with HEROES has really just, it's brought a lot of things home for me, because there have been times that I should have stepped up and said something and did something in my work, and I did not. And the consequences were horrible. So being a national instructor, I try to strive to make sure people know and understand you can do this. You need to say something. You need to step up. People need to know that you are there, and people need to know that they are seen, and people need to know that they matter. And so Heroes has definitely been instrumental in helping me to recognize some of my flaws and trying to make sure that, you know, I show other people the way to do it because it needs to be done.
Thank you so much. I'm thinking about, there's two things that you're talking about that are pull right from our training. And one of them is a skill set that we talk about, which is delegate. And I love, this is probably one of my favorite skills in all of the skills that we teach, because it's exactly what Millie stated. You don't always have to be the person who's doing the intervening. How do you use your allies, your network, your connection to interrupt the harm? And as a mental health professional, who I'm pretty much always the outsider, whether I'm working in corrections or in EMS or law enforcement, I'm always the outsider. I'm rarely the person to intervene, even though as a civilian staff working in corrections, I often am privy to a lot of potential harm. So learning my folks and being able to say, hey, I'm a little bit worried about, Officer Smith. Have you seen the same thing? Do you mind checking in on them, XYZ? So I appreciate that reminder. And the other thing that Millie talked about, and I really want to put this out as a challenge to leaders, and especially we have some folks I know who are just learning about our community here today. One of the things we know from the Dr. Irvin Staub's social psychology research on bystandership is that when people reflect either on their own missed opportunities to intervene or the potential consequences if they don't intervene, while that can be a little bit emotionally challenging, it increases the likelihood that you will intervene. So just simply, if you see harm and you reflect, what could be the potential bad outcomes if somebody doesn't intervene, that reflection alone will increase the likelihood that you'll intervene. It's such a small, simple step, but I want to just give that as a skill set to folks on here today from an active bystandership. But we are also wanting to focus here on faith. We've shared a couple of really cool options, but I wanna come back to Jeremiah and ask you, and then Millie, I'll come back to you as well, because I'd love to hear from both of you on this one. So one or two ways that correctional staff, correctional leaders can incorporate faith-informed resilience strategies into their everyday workday.
Yeah, so we've recently started doing some resiliency training at the New York City Department of Correction, and I think there's an aspect, of course, the stress and the burnout, that's common, and of course experiencing traumatic events, whether they're low level or high level, those can compound. But I think that there is also a concept which maybe a lot of people aren't necessarily attuned to, and that's the idea of moral injury, which can co-occur with PTSD, right? There's a lot of talk about PTSD, but moral injury can also occur, and that's where either your own actions or perhaps the actions of the system you're part of conflict with your own values, right? And that can create a lot of dissonance and really send people, cause them to question, right, everything that they believe in, right? So I think there's opportunities to do the work beforehand, right? When it comes to knowing what you believe and what you stand for. I think that was one of the really critical pieces of my Geneva education, was working through those things and knowing what I believed before I got into that system. So I'm not so sure on the daily basis, but I do think it's helpful. There's a spiritual side to resilience for many people, and I think it's just necessary to dive into that material, spiritual material. Reading Bibles, reading resources, even I guess devotionals, right, can be a source of strength for many people. But I think there are ways that you can inoculate yourself to a certain degree from moral injury, if you know what you stand for.
I love that. I'm gonna not get it exactly correct, but I believe Walt Disney has a quote of, when you know your values, you don't ever have to question your decision making, because you're grounded in that. So know what you stand for. I did put a link in the chat. Jeremiah brings up an amazing point around moral injury. So there's some information in the chat if folks want to learn more about that. And you're absolutely right. And I think corrections brings that potential risk to us every single day. And so appreciate you reminding that. You shared some other strategies, which I think are helpful to our folks, which is the way the optional calls agency wide for some faith-based community. I think it's fantastic. And the correctional officer's prayer, I thought what a great one to just have in your pocket and be ready. Millie, how about you? Any thoughts or strategies?
So I'm going to use a quick example. I have a couple students that are now in corrections, and it used to be that all of them would say, I never want to do corrections. I don't want to do corrections out of fear, because they really didn't even understand what it entailed. But I have a specific student. I pride myself on definitely starting prayer. Every class I start with prayer, and I just bring my faith into everything that I do, not just here at Geneva, but because I'm not perfect by any means. I mess up, but I try to model my faith before my students. So I have a student that moved all the way to Florida, and he is a corrections officer inside of a jail there. And so about a week and a half ago, he had an incident where one of the inmates punched him out. He ended up with a concussion,
Wow.
2 black eyes, broken nose, and a couple teeth not there anymore. And so I had a conversation with someone that's very close to him as well as with him. And I said to him, I said, so what are you thinking right now? I said, are you in it? Are you staying? I said, because we talked about the things that can happen. And he said, you know what? I'm here. I'm here because even though that happened to me, I still need to model who I am. I need to model my faith. And even though that particular inmate, he said, he probably would have done it to anyone. It just happened to be me, but it's an opportunity for me to step up and show him that forgiveness is there and that I forgive him. He said, I'm not turning my back. My values and what I believe is going to continue to be at the forefront of what I do. He said, so I'm here. I'm here and I'm going to continue to model this because somebody behind me may need exactly what happened. They may see what happened and definitely know and understand that you can't turn and walk away from these inmates because they need you. And that right there, it just made, he said, we pray. He did. He actually started like a little prayer group inside of the jail. And so that right there just meant so much to me. And it just showed me that when Dr. Johnson talked about the morals and that moral injury and things like that, it really just made me think about that situation with this officer and how he's still in the healing. They took him off, he's on light duty for right now, but he said, I'm here, I'm staying. This is where I'm supposed to be, and I'm going to walk it out.
I mean, what a powerful story. Thank you for sharing it. I'm sure we all wish him speedy and full recovery.
Yeah.
Serious knockout given those injuries, right? And I thought it was quite fascinating. A terrifying moment into Abigail Tucker's brain here, folks. But as she's telling this story, the psychologist in me is like, boom, right? I'm like, okay, did the people on the shift get debriefed? What was the deployment of EAP as well as peer support team? What supports were offered to him, to his family? And in my brain, I went down my usual, and are we incorporating chaplain? And right then you started sharing your response. And I thought, this is it. Like when we all work together, this is how we create, a wellness opportunity for our folks working. And then you perfectly highlighted then the connection that when we elevate and we support and train the corrections workforce, it has a direct impact on the potential healing journey of anybody who is incarcerated. What a great effort, what a great moment. And for people who are really watching, I totally got a little teared up as you were telling the story because I wear my heart on my sleeve. So wish him absolute wellness in his journey forward. And I thought, a great example, something else that really both of you are highlighting is creating community. One, final question to either one of you, and I certainly, if there's anybody on who would love to share your experience as well, is that one of the things that we hear at Heroes a lot that is a risk factor for moral injury, trauma related, stress related injuries is the isolation. And it's sometimes isolation in your actual job. I mean, people are just, you can be alone for very long periods of time, even though you might be surrounded by hundreds, if not thousands of incarcerated persons, you can be alone in your job, but also the isolation in the identity of being a correctional worker. And I think that our faith offers an opportunity to shine a light on that isolation. And because both of you are really multiple times you've shared, like, we talked to these people or we created this opportunity, this call, you're really creating connection opportunities to decrease isolation in this work. We know that's a risk factor. And curious if either of you have any final thoughts on that topic or on our broader topic before we move to Q&A.
So for me, when I went into the policing field, I really did embrace that whole identity of being a police officer and part of that culture, and just started going down that path of viewing the world in a very black and white type of way. And cops are the good guys, and everybody else, is suspect, right? So, and I think that's natural when it's a little bit of a selection bias based on what you're seeing, and it can lead to some really negative thoughts about the world and other people, and that's something that I struggled with. But I think what did help keep me afloat a little bit was the fact that I was still going to church and having contact with people outside of my vocational field, who had a different world view than what I was surrounded by most of my waking hours. So I think that was, and then education pulled me even further out of that, right? So I sort of had one foot in and one foot out, pursuing these sort of dual vocations. So I do think that as much as the camaraderie is a wonderful thing, and that sense of being known by people who understand exactly what you go through, I think there's some danger in leaning into that too much, and putting yourself in even uncomfortable spaces can be a place for growth, because people don't. I often say that policing is the most visible form of government, and corrections is most likely the least visible. People don't know what goes on in corrections, and that can be a very isolating feeling. But I think actually by being more open and expanding your network and sharing some of those hardships is an important part of elevating the profession, really.
Well stated. Millie, any thoughts?
Just something quickly, and Dr. Jeremiah, he mentioned it, with police work. When that incident, I had several of them, but that particular incident that I talked about, that led me down the path of isolation. But as he was speaking, I thought about vulnerability, and I had to become very vulnerable because I needed help. When that happened to me, I felt like the world, closed in on me, and I felt like my own institution ignored me. I worked in the criminal justice system, and there was no justice for me. And so the feelings that I had, it caused me to be very isolated. I became very negative and cynical. But when I released that opportunity to be vulnerable, I had opportunities to talk to other people. I met with my pastor, and I sought help. I went to our police psychologist. I went through therapy. I went through the necessary avenues that I needed, and I started the healing process, but it wasn't until I had the opportunity to face, and I would not have been able to face that young man if I had not been vulnerable enough to seek the help that I needed. And so by the time I got to him, even though I was still angry, some of the feelings had, kind of dissolved and I was ready. It took a little bit of time, but I was finally ready. And so, um, yeah, that's kind of how it worked out for me.
I appreciate that. And I, what I'm hearing and listening to you, Millie, is that don't miss the opportunity to be vulnerable, because that's where we can really make changes and connect with others in a place of forgiveness. And it makes me think about, when Jeremiah was first talking, I thought about something that I often share with folks working in corrections, which is, please, I know that vigilance is an occupational necessary skill set, but do not confuse that with hypervigilance, which is a clinical symptom. And so when you were talking about, kind of that camaraderie that happens when you're, joining a department, how, one of the things we do talk about in our training is shifting from blind loyalty to a constructive way to still have each other's backs first and foremost, but in a way that doesn't set us up for a misguided sense of loyalty that doesn't serve us, it doesn't serve our peers, and it doesn't serve the work that we're doing. Appreciate that. Well, I want to do one final plug for both of you. Both Dr. Johnsons have LinkedIn pages, and if you registered through the webinar, you should have gotten access to their profile, their picture, and their LinkedIn page, but they're also not hard to find if you want to just search them on LinkedIn and stay connected in that way. I am very excited. Millie's book got released days before this, which worked out to be great timing so that we could share her work. It's right on this topic as well, so please don't hesitate. That's listed in our resources tab here in the webinar. And if you missed that, please let me know how I can get that information to you. And what we're going to do now is I'm going to model 2 actions that we do all the time in Heroes, which is my eternal gratitude for you both, for your time, for sharing your faith, for sharing your perspectives. So thank you, thank you, thank you. And the second thing I'm going to model is that we always end on time, if not a couple of minutes early, because people have busy lives. So I'm going to stick around in case there's any questions that people have, but if not, this concludes our webinar, our Lunch and Learn for today. Thank you all for attending, and we wish you the absolute best.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, bye, folks. Have a great rest of your day. Thank you for joining us. And again, for people who are dropping out, the recording will be sent afterwards. So thank you for attending. Yep, thank you, Adrienne. It was great to have you. You bet. Great to have you as well. Thank you. Thanks, Marcus. I'm so glad you could join us. Great to have everybody.